Hello friends, welcome. My hope is that after watching this video, you'll feel a lot more comfortable using Audacity to submit your auditions and really getting the most you can out of the program. Audacity is simple, but also has some really great features that aren't necessarily obvious. And I wanted to kind of go over 4 of those features to help you edit your audio, to make it sound clear and remove any background noise you might be having trouble with. I think number 1, most important thing, is that your audio will sound infinitely better if you've dedicated time and resources to setting up a good recording environment. It's probably obvious, you may have heard it many times, but it is important. There are a few hacks you can do. Certainly, people tend to use closets. The clothes help a lot. You basically want to avoid having any hard surfaces that will reflect sound and create any unnecessary reverb. People have also put a sheet, depending on your setup, and your microphone stand, or a towel over yourself and the microphone. That can actually be surprisingly effective as well, and obviously quite cheap. All right, so with that out of the way, we can dive right in. So I have an example of 2 audio clips here. They're actually the same audio clip. I'll talk about the second one later. But the first thing I wanted to talk about was checking to make sure that your recording environment is ideal. Here, if you saw what I just did, I click Start Monitoring. You can see that Audacity is showing me the levels at which I'm peaking, basically. So right now, talking at this volume, looks like, with that V there, I spiked up to almost -12, so about -14 or -13 dB. When you're recording, depending on your microphone setup, if you're able to set the gain, so I have an XLR microphone, a condenser microphone into an audio interface, and I can manually control my gain with the interface. I want to set it basically so that my maximums are not breaching -10. This is kind of up to you. Some people will say you can go all the way up to -6. Others will say that they want to stick around -16. Basically, you definitely want to be, I would say, below -6. But I think in the -10 to -16 range is a good one to shoot for. This just allows, makes it so that your voice is certainly loud enough when you're trying to do any post-processing over the noise, without being so loud that you're clipping or you can't really do anything to the audio afterwards. Adding reverb or other effects. So I'm pretty happy with this right now. That's fine. The first thing I'd like to go over with this audio sample, the first thing I usually do is apply noise reduction. The reason why you want to do noise reduction first is because it's destructive. So it's altering your audio source, and you're necessarily doing some damage, usually very small if you do it correctly, some damage to your original signal. And most of the time that'll be imperceptible though, if your noise isn't too egregious. So normally you want to take, for the noise reduction, I'll either make sure I leave a good amount of space before I start recording or a good amount of space afterwards, or when I'm done, just record kind of a blank sample afterwards. So what you want to do is I have a good amount of space here, and I've checked it before to make sure the noise was pretty consistent. You go to Effect, you go to Normalize. There are a couple of checkboxes here. It's pretty simple though. I just realized I went to Normalize. No. So you go to Effect, you go to Noise Reduction. Here you can see that the first thing you want to do, step 1, get the noise profile. So I've already highlighted the audio I want. Make sure you do that first, and you select Get Noise Profile. Now you want to select the entire clip of audio and go back to Noise Reduction again. And here you have a couple of options. These are the default options. You can tinker a lot here. So noise reduction, this is essentially how much Audacity, once it detects noise, how much it'll quench that signal. So right now it's telling it, I'm basically telling, if you see noise, reduce that volume by 12 dB. If you have really not loud noise, if your noise is very consistent, easy to detect, but it's quite loud, you can increase this. And honestly, what you're going to want to do is kind of basically, apply a noise reduction. You can see the audio shifted a little bit. Hard to tell because I don't have a lot of noise already. and you can play that audio back. And if you're still hearing a lot of noise or something else, then you can go back, you can undo, go back, and play with these levels again. So sensitivity, again, that's how Audacity is looking for noise. I won't explain exactly how Audacity checks for noise, but basically as you increase sensitivity, you increase the likelihood that Audacity is also going to pick up some of the signal you want to keep. So I would say use this feature sparingly. If you set this really low, what you'll notice, you obviously want to set this to the minimum point where it's reducing noise without altering your audio. But if you also set this really low, what you'll notice is that Audacity will get rid of some of the noise, but it'll leave some other noise in, unless your noise is very, very consistent in terms of its frequency and volume. And so if you do set this low, that's when you can start playing around with frequency smoothing bands. So I'm going to just say that you can click this wonderful help icon here to find more information about when you'd want to use these features, but usually you're quite safe setting them at around this level and playing around with the amount of volume that you want to reduce the noise by. And like I said, you kind of just go through this in trial and error, see what your noise reduction does. If it's not doing enough, then you can go back and change and increase the amount you're reducing your signal by. So that's noise reduction. The next thing I'll usually do after that is normalize the audio. So I would say that in general, first of all, you can just leave this checkbox. This is almost always going to be irrelevant. You shouldn't really have any DC offset unless you're using a complicated audio setup where you might have like an old piece of equipment that's causing you issues. And let's forget about this checkbox for now, but you can just leave it checked. The important one is how you want to normalize your peak amplitude. So in general, just from what I found online and what's useful for auditions, setting it somewhere between -3 and -6 makes sure that your audio is loud enough that someone doesn't have to crank their headset to try and understand what you're saying. A lot of times, I think people might not be normalizing their audio, which can sound good because you tend not to hear any background, but you also can't hear nuance in your voice. So that's why it's important to make sure that your audio is loud enough so that someone listening on their computer at whatever reasonable level is gonna be able to understand you just fine. For me, I've just settled kind of on -4. Again, you can kind of play around with what sounds good to you. I think -3 to me sounds a bit too loud. -6 is maybe a little too quiet. So -4, -4.5, I don't know, something like that is good for me. So if I normalize this, what you'll see is that it's boosted basically all of the entire signal here, the entire audio file. It's been boosted a bit such that the peak, the loudest part of the audio hits -4, -4 dB. The issue though is that I've done this specifically in this audio. I've whispered here, and then I've talked at a normal volume, and then I've shouted into my microphone. It's very likely that in your performance, you might have to do in a single take or in your single recording, you'll have parts where you're crying or you're acting solemn. That might be very quiet, and there are other parts where you're screaming, you're acting like you're panicked or terrified, and those parts might necessarily be loud. Ideally, you want to bring these levels closer together, and that's where compression really helps. So if I go back and go to the compressor, so Audacity, actually always going to effects here and find compressor, you get this window, which looks maybe a little intimidating. It has a lot of sliders. What I'll say is that for my setting here at -4 dB, these settings work well. So we can talk about the threshold first. And noise floor, we're going to ignore. Ratio, we can mention. Okay, so for threshold, if I set this too high, if I set it at -12, which is the default setting, if we take a look to see what happens to the audio file, nothing actually changes. So again here, basically what you're saying is when the audio kind of peaks above this threshold, reduce the audio by a ratio of 2:1. Okay, so that's what this ratio is. So if I change this, you can see that the steepness of this curve changes quite significantly. So we're gonna leave that at 2:1. Now you might be thinking, well, I normalized the volume before to -4, so there is some audio that's above -12, but when I did this, nothing happened. So the reason for that is that the attack time is at 0.2 seconds. So basically, the audio is peaking for a really short amount of time, so the compressor function here is not actually able to do anything because it's such a short amount of time. It basically sees it, and by the time it sees it, these 0.2 seconds have passed. So what I'm going to do is reduce this down to -16. Now, as soon as it sees -16, it's looking ahead. It'll then start to apply the compression function to reduce the audio volume, again by a ratio of 2:1. And so if we do this, we can see that gets a little smaller, which is good. For this one though, I might even want to do a little more because I had some really quiet parts here, like I said, and some really loud parts. So I'll go back to the compressor. I think I could do increase this to maybe 3. See what that does. So that's, again, it's all right. So again, maybe what's obvious here is like a lot of this is a little bit of trial and error. And there's no set setting that's going to work for all of your auditions because, like I said before, you might not even have to use the compressor if you have an audition that doesn't require high dynamic range of volume. It's fine. So just reduce this again. -20. Okay, that's a bit better. That might actually be a little too much. There's definitely such a thing as over compressing. If you compress it too much, then everything sounds flat and the same, and you don't really want your whispery parts to sound just as loud as your loud parts, but you just want to make sure that everything is within a reasonable level from each other. So one more time, might edit some of this out. Let's see. -18. That might be what we need. Okay, I think I'm happy with this. So now that I've compressed it, what I'm going to do is renormalize it again, because before this peak was at -4, which is what I set it at, but now it's obviously below that. So we can renormalize it to -4. Now everything is a bit louder, and you can hear my dumb audio clip. Let's see. Audacity, yeah. Audacity, yeah. Audacity, yeah. All right, yeah, that's not too bad. Again, you can kind of play with this as much as you want to kind of get these levels to where you'd prefer them to be. Okay, I can still hear a bit of noise in my track, and even though ideally, like I said, you want to do a good amount of noise reduction before you normalize. It's okay to do it afterwards. Again, just go through the same process of checking to make sure your audio quality is staying all right, and you can maybe reduce the sensitivity or something else to make sure that you're not damaging your original track. What we're going to try as well, the other thing you can do to kind of get rid of noise is to also use a great additional plugin called noise gating. So I can put this link in the description, but basically you can download Noise Gate from the wiki page, the audacityteam.org wiki page. It lists all of the basically the features that we'll see in a second, but you can just download this. Once you download it, you're gonna have to put it in your Audacity plugins folder, which you can find in your C drive program files, Audacity. So if we return to Audacity, what I'm going to do is, I guess I'll show you actually really quickly too. If I go to effects, I go to add remove plugins. So this is the last step. So say you've installed, or so you've downloaded it, you put it in your folder. You'll then need to find it here. So I can see Noise Gate. It'll say new, and you'll just want to click enable. So, right. So let's go to Noise Gate. It should be down here. I'm blind. There we go. Okay. Again, a number of features here as well. Let's see. I think, yeah, let's cover the most relevant ones here. Okay, level reduction, gate threshold, attack, and decay. Change that. So level reduction, again, kind of similar to noise, what we saw in the noise reduction, basically says, okay, so there's a gate threshold here. above 48 dB, so when the audio is above 48 dB, the gate is open, the audio plays normally, everything is good. When the audio is below 48 dB, this gate is going to reduce whatever it sees below this level, again by 16 dB. So if you really want to, obviously you can quench all of the noise really heavily by reducing this a lot, but you run the risk of having your audio sound a little weird in the pauses where it's maybe like incredibly quiet, or if you have a pause between like within sentences, something like that, it might sound a bit weird. I guess though generally you can actually set this to quite a high level, but I mean, again, you just want to do it so basically the lowest values where it's acceptable. That's kind of always the trick with all of these tools. The lowest value, you want to set these things be as light as possible, as friendly as possible to your audio, basically. Okay, and like I said, the other thing that's important is the gate threshold. So what I'm actually going to do is kind of look.
Audacity, yeah.
Okay, I can kind of see that my audio,
Audacity,
the noise,
yeah.
Okay, the noise is kind of sitting between -36 and -42, right? So I'm going to take advantage of that knowledge to go back into noise gate. And this is, you're always going to want to check to kind of see, because this is the gate threshold is we're going to have to play with the most. So we'll try maybe -40 or we'll try -37 or 38 actually. So we'll do 38. Okay. And again, the attack decay is similar to what we saw in the compressor. Here, basically, what it's doing is that when it sees, it's just how quickly, essentially, the Audacity applies this -16 dB quenching. So if it's really low, then it's going to quench that really fast, which, again, could sound weird. And if it's really high, then it's going to be a very gradual decrease in volume and increase as you start speaking. So 125 is kind of what I've done. I think that's, you can play around with this yourself, and it's very easy to notice if you just play with the slider, put it really low or really high, you'll see what happens. So 125. You can see that that's actually looks like it's doing a good job in removing a lot of the little squibbles that we saw before. So let's see how the audio sounds.
Audacity, yeah.
Okay, you saw, or you could hear maybe that it sounded a little weird here, like the audio is going in and out. So I could change one or two things. I could either increase the attack so that it's not changing the volume so drastically as I kind of whisper here, or I could just decrease the threshold a bit more. So yeah, if you have really quiet parts in the audio, nose gating is a little trickier, but
Audacity, yeah.
Yeah, you can see that, for this fine, we can assume this is fine too, but you can see that for this one, it makes it sound really nice. There's no noise here. It's very clear in between. The other thing that's nice about noise gating is it's really good at removing if you have breaths between your words or whatever else, or between sentences. It'll help to reduce that because the breaths are usually quite quiet. All right, cool. The very last thing I wanted to talk about was what happens if you don't have a proper setup. It's worth noting too, if you can't control the gain on your microphone, obviously the other easy thing to do is set the distance to your mic. I think ideally, like being a half a foot away, depending on your microphone, a half a foot to a foot maybe away is ideal. But you can change the levels here, obviously by moving closer or farther away. So that's just one other thing to mention. In this track, you can see that these peaks here are actually, kind of going outside of the window. They're clipping. They're being clipped off. That's why it's called clipping. And in the audio, it sounds really awful, because basically the maximum volume, the peak volume, is hitting a threshold in which it can't be accurately reproduced, and so
Audacity, yeah.
Wow, I'll make sure I reduce that volume later, but it sounds really awful. So you want to avoid this at all costs. The way I did this to this audio was just by amplifying it and saying that I don't care if it clips. So if you ever see this in your audio, if you ever see this, please please, either, renormalize it to something like -4, which will fix it instantly, or I should say though that again, you really want to make sure that when you're recording that you're not clipping. But if you accidentally amplify something too much and you clip it, okay, you can save your audio. But anyways, normalizing it or just reducing the amplification, whatever. But I suggest normalizing will help you fix that. So yeah, please make sure you're not clipping. Your acting, your screaming is going to sound a lot worse than it should be. And obviously you want to make sure that you're presenting your best self. Okay, this is going to be a long video. I'll put timestamps so you can skip ahead. But yeah, thank you very much for listening, and I'll see you guys later.